In this video, we're going to be looking at right triangles and using a method called the Pythagorean Theorem, in which we have two sides that we know and a third side that we do not know. Sometimes it's the side that's across from your right angle. Other times, as you see here, it's one of the sides that makes up your right angle. So with no further ado, let's get it on. Let's take a look at how the Pythagorean theorem works. First of all, just so you know, as a little bit of background, it was actually invented by a Greek mathematician and philosopher named Pythagoras, and that's where this name comes from. And what Pythagoras said thousands of years ago was, if you've got a right triangle, and the two sides that make up that right triangle are called legs, and then the third side, which is across from your right angle, that would be the hypotenuse. I know, crazy name, but that's what it's called. What he said is that if you take leg 1 and square it, and you add it to leg 2 squared, it should equal the hypotenuse squared. Now, as you can tell, that's a lot to say, legs and hypotenuse, all that kind of stuff. So nowadays, what you're typically going to see is you're going to see this theorem instead. A squared plus b squared equals c squared, where a and b are going to be your two legs, and then c is going to be your hypotenuse. So that's a quick little thing on how the Pythagorean theorem works. And finally, a little disclaimer up here in the right corner. You have to understand this method only works with right triangles. So any other kind of triangle, if it's not a right triangle, this will not work. So let's go ahead now and put this into action. I've got myself the right triangle you saw in the introduction slide, and I know the two legs. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to call one of them A, and I'm going to call one of them B. It doesn't really matter which one I call A and B as long as they're both legs. And then X is going to be a C. So if we're using the Pythagorean theorem that says A squared plus B squared equals C squared, what we can then do is we can plug in those values. So since A is 7, we can write 7 squared. B would be considered 5, so we'd say 5 squared, and then equals C squared. So if we take 7, multiply it by itself, we're going to get 49. 5 squared is 5 times 5, or 25, and then that should equal c squared. And then we have 49 plus 25, that's 74. And by the way, I forgot to do this earlier, but let's just go ahead and call c x, because that's what we did over here. So I'm going to write x squared instead of c squared. Then to solve this, to undo the square, we're going to square root both sides. And I'm going to go ahead and reverse sides now. So the square root of x squared is going to be x, and the square root of 74 is square root of 74. And if you grab your calculator like I did earlier, it's about 8.60. One thing, just kind of a sanity check here, is C, the hypotenuse, is always going to be the biggest side. So if it is 8.60 like we calculated, you should check to make sure that that is the biggest side, and of course it is. It's bigger than 5 and 7. If you like what you've seen and heard so far, please like, comment, or subscribe. Thank you, and back to part 2. Finally, let's take a look now at what would happen if the missing side is not the hypotenuse, in other words, is one of the legs. So I'm going to go ahead and call this side A, this side B, and of course this side would be C because it is the hypotenuse. It's the side across from the right angle. So I'm going to write out x squared plus 10 squared equals 15 squared. Grab my calculator. I know that 10 squared is 100. Use my calculator right now in case you did not know 15 times itself is 225. So what's different about this is that in this situation your x squared has plus 100 with it over here. So we're not going to immediately go to square rooting. And instead what we're going to do is we're going to subtract 100 from both sides. And when we do that, we get x squared on the left side. And over here on the right side, 225 minus 100 is 125, and therefore when we go ahead and square root, the square root of x squared would be x, and the square root of 125 is going to be approximately 11.18. Once again, to sanity check myself over here, I'm going to write 11.18 over here, and you should notice that the hypotenuse, which is 15, is bigger than both sides. So that's a quick way to check, just to make sure you didn't get some crazy number or do something weird on your calculator. So that's it. That's how the Pythagorean theorem works. Hope you enjoyed this episode and hope to see you soon.